Hi, Natasha, N.K.O, 11th of August, 1348, back with M. Scott Peck's People of the Lie, Chapter 5 of Possession and Exorcism on page 208. And I just want to check, it's Chapter 5 of a total of 7 chapters. Chapter 5 has a number of subheadings. The first subheading is called Does the Devil Exist? 5 years ago, when I began work on this book, I could no longer avoid the issue of the demonic. The cases of George and Charlene had tentatively raised the issue, but neither required its resolution. Writing directly on the subject of evil was another matter, however. Having come over the years to a belief in the reality of benign spirit or God, and a belief in the reality of human evil, I was left facing an obvious intellectual question. Is there such a thing as evil spirit, namely the devil? I thought not. In common with 99% of psychiatrists and a majority of clergy, I did not think the devil existed. Still, priding myself on being an open-minded scientist, I felt I had to examine the evidence that might challenge my inclination in the matter. It occurred to me that if I could see one good old-fashioned case of possession, I might change my mind. Of course, I did not believe that possession existed. In 15 years of busy psychiatric practice, I had never seen anything faintly resembling a case. Admittedly, for the first 10 of those years, I might, with my prejudice, have walked right over one and not known it. But in the 5 years since George and Charlene, I had been vaguely open to the possibility and still had not seen a case. I doubted that I ever would. But the fact that I had seen a case did not mean such cases, past or present, were out of the question. I had discovered a large volume of literature on the subject, none of it scientific. Much of it seemed naive, simplistic, shoddy, or sensational. A few authors, however, seemed thoughtful and sophisticated, and they invariably stated that genuine possession was a very rare phenomenon. I therefore could not assume it to be unreal on the basis of limited experience. So I decided to go out and look for a case. I wrote around and let it be known that I was interested in observing cases of purported possession for evaluation. Referrals trickled in. The first 2 cases turned out to be suffering from standard psychiatric disorders, as I had suspected, and I began making marks on my scientific pistol. The third case turned out to be the real thing. Since then, I have also been deeply involved with another case of genuine possession. In both cases, I was privileged to be present at their successful exorcisms. The vast majority of cases described in the literature are those of possession by minor demons. These 2 were highly unusual in that both were cases of satanic possession. I now know Satan is real. I have met it. The reader will be naturally disappointed, even sceptical, that I am not going to describe either of these cases in depth. But there are a number of compelling reasons for my withholding such descriptions. The most compelling is that to describe just one of these cases would completely unbalance this book. Each case was extraordinarily complex, far more so than usual psychiatric patients. To begin to do justice to one of them would require a small book in itself. Genuine possession, as far as we know, is very rare. Human evil, on the other hand, is common. Since the relationship between possession and ordinary evil is obscure at best, it would be highly unrealistic to devote half these pages to the subject. Nonetheless, I might be tempted to do so, were it not for the fact that there is a book that describes quite well 5 cases of possession. Malachi Martin's Hostage to the Devil. There's a note there, and it says that's of Bantam Books, 1977. All of my experience confirms the accuracy and depth of understanding of Martin's work, and a case description of my own would contribute practically nothing beyond his writings. The sceptical reader is likely to ask, how can you hope to prove to me the reality of the devil when you don't even present your evidence? The answer is that I don't hope to convince the reader of Satan's reality. Conversion to a belief in God generally requires some kind of actual encounter, a personal experience with the living God. Conversion to a belief in Satan is no different. I had read Martin's book before witnessing my first exorcism, and while I was intrigued, I was hardly convinced of the devil's reality. It was another matter after I had personally met Satan face to face. There is no way I can translate my experience into your experience. It is my intent, however, that, as a result of my experience, closed-minded readers will become more open-minded in relation to the reality of evil spirit. Finally, on the basis of 2 cases alone, I am simply not able to offer a broad, in-depth scientific presentation on the subjects of evil, spirit possession, and exorcism. It is an old maxim of science that once you answer a question, others immediately take its place. Previously, I had a single question: does the devil exist? Now that this has been answered in the affirmative to my personal satisfaction, I have several dozen new questions I did not have before. The mystery is enormous. Nonetheless, I am equally compelled to recount some of what I think I have learned from my rather extraordinary experience in these matters. Being convinced of the reality of demonic possession, however rare, I am equally certain that clergy and psychotherapists and human service institutions are seeing such cases, whether they know it or not. To help the victims of possession, they will need all the assistance they can get. Martin's book is certainly the place to start. But while he describes cases at least as well as I could, he is not a psychiatrist, and I think I do have some important insights to offer in addition to his. These insights centre around the psychiatric aspects of possession and the psychotherapeutic aspects of exorcism. Moreover, obscure though it might be, I do believe there is some relationship between satanic activity and human evil. This book would not be complete without offering the little we do seem to know about the father of lies. Subheading: Caution, High Voltage. Page 211. One might think of exorcism and psychotherapy as utterly different, mutually exclusive approaches. The 2 exorcisms I witnessed, however, both seemed to me to be psychotherapeutic processes, in method as well as outcome. Indeed, a week after one exorcism, the patient, who had been seeing psychiatrists for many years, exclaimed, "All psychotherapy is a kind of exorcism." And in my experience, all good psychotherapy does in fact combat lies. The differences between psychoanalytic psychotherapy and exorcism fall into 2 categories: conceptual frames of reference and the use of power. Almost innumerable volumes have been written about the conceptual frames of reference of Christianity and psychoanalysis, and it is not now appropriate to delve more deeply into the subject. What is appropriate is to point out that these frames of reference need not be mutually exclusive. I have been combining them in various mixtures in ordinary psychotherapy for some years, with many patients and apparently with considerable success. There's a note. The note says, "The speech I give to professional therapists, which is most frequently in demand, is entitled 'The Use of Religious Concepts in Psychotherapy.' Increasing numbers of other therapists have been doing likewise. As to the use of power, psychoanalytic psychotherapy and exorcism are radically different. Traditional psychotherapy, whether it be psychoanalytically oriented or not, deliberately makes little or no use whatsoever of power. It is conducted in an atmosphere of total freedom. The patient is free to quit therapy at any time. Indeed, he or she is free to leave even in the middle of a session, as Charlene in fact not infrequently did. Except for the threat of refusing to see the patient anymore, which is virtually never a constructive manoeuvre, the therapist has no weapons with which to push for change beyond the persuasive power of his or her own wits, understanding and love. Exorcism is another matter. Here the healer calls upon every power that is legitimately, lovingly available in the battle against the patient's sickness. First of all, exorcism, as far as I know, is always conducted by a team of at least 3 or more. In a sense, the team gangs up on the patient. Unlike traditional therapy, in which it is one against one, In exorcism, the patient is outnumbered. The length of an exorcism session is not present, but is at the discretion of the team leader. In ordinary psychotherapy, the session is no more than an hour, and the patient knows this. If they want to, patients can evade almost any issue for an hour. But exorcism sessions may last 3, 5, or even 10 or 12 hours, as long as the team feels is required to confront the issue. Also, the patient may be forcibly restrained during an exorcism session, and indeed frequently is, which is one of the reasons for the team approach. He or she cannot, like Charlene, walk out whenever things get unpleasant. Finally, and most important, the exorcism team, through prayer and ritual, invokes the power of God in the healing process. For the non-believer, this may seem like an ineffective measure, or else its effectiveness would be explained in terms of the mere power of suggestion. Speaking as a believer, I can only offer my personal experience of the presence of God in the room during exorcisms I witnessed. There's a note. It reads, "A confirmed atheist who witnessed the same exorcisms did not have that same experience, although there is much about them he cannot explain. For me, however, the power of God on these occasions was palpable." Indeed, as far as a Christian exorcist is concerned, it is not he or she who successfully completes the process, it is God who does the healing. The whole purpose of the prayer and ritual is to bring the power of God into the fray. So it is that exorcism is seen by its practitioners in terms of spiritual warfare. The strategy is not, one hopes, that all is fair in war, but the exorcist does believe it is legitimate to use any and every loving means to ask for any loving help and use any loving resource that can be summoned or otherwise made available in the battle. The key word is loving. Because it not only condones but insists on the use of power, I consider exorcism to be a dangerous procedure. Power is always subject to misuse, but the simple fact of its potential danger is hardly reason to outlaw it. The 4-hour neurosurgical procedure that I underwent 3 years ago to relieve the pressure of disc and bone on the spinal cord in my neck was dangerous. It also made it possible for me to be writing these very words this very moment instead of being a bedridden quadriplegic or insane with chronic pain. From my vantage point, exorcism stands in relation to ordinary psychotherapy as radical surgery does to lancing a boil. Radical surgery can be not only healing but life-saving, and in fact may be the only way to heal in certain cases, unresponsive to more conservative therapy. One issue to be considered in relation to the use of power in exorcism is that of brainwashing. I have struggled with this issue and have concluded that exorcism is indeed a form of brainwashing. One individual whose exorcism I witnessed was highly ambivalent after the procedure, simultaneously feeling relieved, profoundly grateful, and raped. In the years since then, the feelings of gratitude and relief have, if anything, increased, and the sense of rape has faded, as does the trauma of surgery. What prevents exorcism from being true rape is that, as with surgery, the individual consents to the procedure. One safeguard against the misuse of power in exorcism is to beat in the mind the extreme importance of this issue of consent. I suspect some exorcists consider it too lightly, and perhaps one thing we practitioners of traditional medicine and surgery can contribute to exorcism is an insistence on informed consent. So it is that before surgery we will formally and legally read patients their rights, or rather a list of rights they are consenting to forfeit. During a procedure of exorcism, patients forfeit a great deal of their freedom. I firmly believe that forfeiture should be under legal conditions and conducted in a legal manner. Before the procedure, patients should sign not simple but elaborate authorization forms. They should know exactly what they are letting themselves in for. And if a patient is clearly incapable of such awareness, a guardian should be legally appointed to make a reasoned decision for him or her. Other safeguards should be employed as well. An objective record should be kept of the proceedings, which can be made public if the patient or guardian desires. At the very least, this record should be an audio tape. Preferably, it should be a videotape. A relative should be present. There's a note here that says, this last position may currently verge on the idealistic and impractical. In specific, desperate instances, I would probably forego it. Conservative lawyers would argue that no patient who is possessed or in need of exorcism is mentally competent to give such authorization, and the courts would likely not authorize the procedure of exorcism except on the testimony of traditional psychiatrists who do not believe in it to begin with. This safeguard does not simply have moral legal utility, it is a potentially invaluable aid in the healing process. The exorcism team may need to record to check their remembrance of events in the heat of battle with the emotionless validity of tapes. Review of the tapes may also be extremely helpful to the patient, who often has difficulty believing that it really did happen, and can be a very effective tool in the more ordinary psychotherapy that should invariably follow an exorcism. Finally, given the patient's permission, such tapes will be invaluable for both research and teaching purposes. So back to the text. It said, a relative should be present if one suitably detached can be found, but the greatest safeguard is love. Only with love can exorcists discern between interventions that are fair and necessary and those that are manipulative or truly violating. Only with love can practitioners be sure to keep the patient's best interest in mind at all times and be certain of resisting the omnipresent human tendency to become unscrupulous and enamored with power. Indeed, in all serious cases, more is required than knowledge and skill. It is only love that can heal. Exorcism is not a magical procedure, unless one considers love to be magical. As in psychotherapy, it makes use of analysis, of careful discernment, of interpretation, of encouragement, and of loving confrontation. It differs from traditional psychotherapy only as open heart surgery differs from a tonsillectomy. Exorcism is psychotherapy by massive assault. Like any massive assault, it is potentially quite dangerous and should be used only in cases so severe that lesser varieties of psychotherapy are doomed to failure. Moreover, it should be regarded as an experimental procedure until it has been scientifically investigated. In exorcism, one is dealing with very high voltages. The whole purpose of an exorcism is to uncover and isolate the demonic within the patient so that it can then be expelled. The demonic can have a tremendous energy of its own. Perhaps there are cases in which this energy is too powerful for either the patient or the team to cope with. Or the patient may not truly desire to be rid of it. Then the outcome of an exorcism would probably leave the patient worse off than before. The result could conceivably even be fatal. In such cases, it would be better if the high-voltage demonic energy had never been tapped into or uncovered in the first place. Before both exorcisms in which I participated, the patient signed consent forms acknowledging their awareness that the exorcism might fail and that they might even die as a result of the procedure. This should give the reader some notion of their courage and desperation. Then there is the danger to the exorcist and the other team members. From my limited experience, I suspect Martin may have overemphasized the physical dangers, but the psychological dangers are real and enormous. Both the exorcisms I witnessed were successful. I shudder to think what the effect would have been on the exorcist or other team members on me if they had failed. Even though all team members had been carefully chosen for their psychological strength as well as their love, the procedures were stressful for everyone. And even though the outcome was successful, most had emotional reactions to contend with in the weeks afterward. I might add that exorcism is not what one would ordinarily think of as a cost-effective procedure. The first and easier required a team of 7 highly trained professionals to work without payment for 4 days, 12 to 16 hours a day. The second involved a similar team of 9 men and women who worked 12 to 20 hours a day for 3 days. Not that it is necessarily always such a massive undertaking. I remind the reader that both cases were apparently unusual in being satanic possessions. Difficult and dangerous though they were, the exorcisms I witnessed were successful. I cannot imagine how otherwise the 2 patients would have been healed. They are both alive and very well today. I have every reason to believe that had they not had their exorcisms, they would each be dead by now. I will stop there on page 216. It's reminding me of a lot of stuff that I'm going to talk about, so thank you for listening.